The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. This is Bill Martinez, and we are live. We're going to be talking about, believe it or not, a pandemic that's just around the corner. In fact, experts have said, medical experts, okay, not people from, social media or other groups that somehow think that they are the bastions of information and the truth holders, but scientists are saying that there are as many as 9 pandemics lurking about. And we're going to break this down with an emergency room doctor who's been at the cutting edge of all of this back in the early days of COVID. And what he brings to the discussion is practical experience. And I will say this from the very beginning to, offer a little bit of cover for those entities that would want to marginalize us, cancel us, censor us. I will say this: what information we share with you comes with this caveat that you must own your own knowledge. Don't just take our word from it. Check it out for yourself. And because all that our next guest, Dr. Richard Bartlett, the emergency room doctor, will share with us is all researched. It's fully documented. This is not about theory. This has to do about your health and protecting you to make sure that you are safe, you're well, and that you truly are given the option to give your consent to your doctors and whoever is going to advise you. Dr. Richard Bartlett, as I mentioned, an emergency room medical director. He's here to talk about the government spending as well, this latest bill that gives $315 million for future influenza pandemic involving a virus that's been that has been made to be more contagious and deadly. It's the H5N1 Bird Flu that you may have heard about. Dr. Bartlett, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Martinez, it's an honor to be with you today.
Well, Dr. Bartlett, is that a fair disclaimer in warning people about what we're going to share with them? Because knowledge is power. This is important that they have this kind of information so that they know what's coming, because the fact of the matter is, you've already got in Western Minnesota a goat that tested positive for bird flu. What's all that about?
Yeah, you got to ask, why is CBS News fixated on a goat that didn't die having a positive test for bird flu? Mm-hmm. Why is that national news, Bill, when we have a war in Israel, we have a war in the Ukraine, we have the Houthi rebels, we have stuff going on, and we have a bridge that collapsed. We have all kinds of things that are happening in the United States and outside the United States, and they're wanting us to know this. Why are they wanting us to have that in the back of our mind? I think it's because a narrative is being formed that we have a natural phenomena, so that when there's a pandemic in the near future of bird flu, I think they're making their case to the public slowly that it's a bird flu that started from nature with birds to penguins to seals to Western Minnesota goat to eventually humans. And so that's going to be the mainstream narrative. It's pretty clear to me they're already making their case. Right. When in fact, Bill, we had reports and evidence of bird flu being souped up in biolabs for the last 8 years at least.
Exactly. Yeah. And this isn't at a Wuhan lab. In some cases, it's here in the United States. You've heard the term gain of function, which has now become an acceptable term, Dr. Bartlett, where, back in the days, gain of function was just a fancy word for, bioweaponry, wasn't it?
It is genetic engineering, and it is splicing in genes and doing other mechanisms to make a virus that's in nature more deadly, more contagious to humans. And so make no mistake, there's not a good reason to do gain of function research. There was a moratorium on gain of function research at one point, and that's what led to the technology and the equipment going from North Carolina, Chapel Hill to Wuhan Institute of Virology. And it was offshored because it was illegal in the United States.
Exactly. Well, and like I said, here they are. The mad scientists are back at work. They cannot help themselves. If you remember, during the congressional hearings, Dr. Fauci was a ardent defender of gain of function. This idea that, somehow the scientists need to, get in front of any potential pandemic and know how to solve it just in case. Well, it's on the surface, it sounds okay, but when you really drill down and understand that this is unsafe, isn't it?
Right. I mean, I think the experiment was done. We saw that we have the evidence that doing gain of function with COVID viruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, one of the strains they were working on was WIV1, Wuhan Institute of Virology 1, COVID. There. So you got to say, we did this experiment. He was proven to be wrong. It's not safe. It caused a worldwide pandemic. And the FBI has concluded that it was a lab leak, that it came from that lab, meaning it wasn't a natural disease. It's not a normal virus. It's a bioweapon made in a lab that, according to the FBI and according to the Department of Energy Intelligence Agency.
Yes. Again, just so that, the fact checkers and those that are monitoring what you and I are talking about, this is information from scientists, from our own government. Okay, so they can drill down if they're interested in doing that, as opposed to just doing some, surface knee-jerk cancellation or censorship, right?
Well, Bill, I don't think you're going to be able to talk them out of doing what they want to do, because there's an agenda that has been followed with the COVID narrative. And it doesn't matter. The facts don't seem to sway the fact checkers. This was, they said it was not a lab leak, that was just a bogus conspiracy theory, when in reality, 3 years later, the FBI says, we believe it's a lab leak. We have evidence of that. And so, but the fact checkers haven't changed their story with the evidence and with the facts. So I think you can, the people with common sense that follow Bill Martinez regularly, they're going to do their own research and they're going to find the facts. But we're not going to be able to sway those that are actually trying to push a narrative and talking points. And so what is going on right now? We just went through COVID. It was the result of gain of function research. It's not a good idea. And it's led to, there's several things that are at play. We're about to have another pandemic. It's clear. The Dr. Tedros, the World Health Organization, who's not a medical doctor, nurse, chiropractor, pharmacist, but he's the number one person making decisions about the World Health Organization recommendations, which is that branch of the UN, which is un-American, anti-American. And the WHO is absolutely anti-American, not elected by Americans. And he has sway over what's a worldwide crisis and how to deal with it.
He has more. It's more than sway. I mean, he's becoming a determined factor. I mean, it was during COVID. Even Facebook, they would cancel you, censor you if what you were saying did not agree with what the WHO was purporting. And even now, Richard, where it stands is the WHO is prepared. They've already, I think, had like over 150 nations sign on to a document that empowers the WHO to be in charge of any future pandemic. And it's a matter of time, according to our reports and our investigation, as the Biden administration wants to sign on to that document as well, so that we would surrender. You imagine this. We would surrender our sovereignty. The United States of America's sovereignty would be surrendered to this group, the United Nations, and somebody who is not a medical professional. He just happens to be in charge of the WHO, who, by the way, is a card-carrying Marxist. Like, so does he hold to any of the ideals of, our American founding?
No, he's actually from a country outside of Somalia, Eurasia.
Mm-hmm.
Eurasia has a terrible human rights record. He is not a medical doctor, did not treat one case of COVID, did not save one life. He's not a nurse, chiropractor, pharmacist, janitor in a hospital. He has no medical expertise, yet he is appointed at that position. The World Health Organization, which has a tremendous amount of funding, a great percentage of their funding comes from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That should tell you a lot.
Exactly.
And it's an anti-American establishment, the WHO. And so just to give you a little taste of the decision-making he makes, when monkeypox was in the news, and they were trying to scare everybody with monkeypox, and they were starting to have mass vaccination campaigns for monkeypox in the United States, starting in New York, Dr. Tedros overrode the advice from epidemiologists, virologists, and experts that told him it's not a worldwide pandemic. He vetoed all their advice, and he on his own said monkeypox is a worldwide crisis, health crisis. And so that was over a year ago. Do you remember the crisis?
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah, I remember that.
And so it was ridiculous. And so another thing is, I mean, you can just go down the list of showing how he was wrong over and over again. And that's the guy that wants to dictate with this treaty that's supposed to happen in May, I believe, that you alluded to, where the WHO will supersede our sovereign rights in the United States. In other words, every American will not be able to do what their doctor says.
Exactly.
They're going to have to do what the WHO says.
Yeah. And the thing is, by the way, again, I want to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Dr. Richard Bartlett. He's the emergency room medical director. Okay. Not somebody from the WHO who's had no medical experience whatsoever. He is fully licensed and operational. He knows what he's talking about. He has all these years of experience that he brings to bear on this important issue so that you would be educated and not fall victim to the many of millions who did during COVID. And the thing that amazes me, Richard, after everything is all said and done, I mean, look at it. We've got a very small percentage, I don't know, maybe 10, 15% of the ruling elites that are controlling this narrative. They're responsible, I believe, in killing millions of people. And when I say they are directly responsible because they pushed all this treatment and so much of COVID, which probably shouldn't have even gone into play, including the vaccine, as you know, because the vaccine, the way it was expedited was because of an emergency authorization use. And as you know, you cannot enact an EAU if there's already a drug on, that's being used that'll solve the problem. And we had many options, but yet the WHO and these powers to be within our country, Dr. Fauci and the like, the NIH, led us to believe that there was nothing on the shelf that was ready to use. And along the way, then we find out there's certain things like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, which, by the way, yesterday, and I tried to look into this further to figure out, okay, I could have sworn, Richard, that I heard yesterday that they were doing kind of a backstep on ivermectin that's saying that, this should be authorized by the FDA. But when I went to the website, there was no update on it. So they're slow walking this information on purpose to control this narrative, to make sure this next pandemic that comes up that, like we did the last time, that we're all compliant, that we're all listening to, celebrities and, whether they're from entertainment or the music world, telling us how we need to take the jab, that we need to be part of the team, and regardless of any kind of complication or any fear that we may have, right?
Funding that originated with the United States government was sent to comedians,
yes,
to actors, to professional athletes, to people that were able to move, that had a following on social media, so that they would be recruited to try to coerce, to try to manipulate, to try to entice people to get the COVID shots.
Exactly.
And so that's what happened. And the one treatment that you didn't mention was budesonide. That's probably
Yes.
the biggest kept secret during COVID, is that we had an effective treatment strategy for COVID that cost $3 a treatment if you paid the full cash price, that was available at every pharmacy on every corner, that was proven by Oxford University in the STOIC trial and the principal trial, randomized controlled trials, that's science, that 90% of the people never would have even gone to an emergency room or a hospital if they would have been treated with budesonide. In every single study, it was proven and studied by nations, by Iran, France, Spain, the UK, Australia, Brazil, the United States, NIH. All of them studied this generic, inexpensive, readily available inhaled steroid that can be given by a nebulizer treatment. And they all found in every single study that it was effective against COVID. Further, in 2017, Egypt showed that this inhaled steroid that's readily available, used by millions of Americans for decades, would work for ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and acute lung injury. So this was a treatment that was proven to work for late disease and early disease with COVID. But when I did a video at the beginning of COVID in July of 2020 that went viral, 5.5 million views, and YouTube pulled it in 10 days saying it was inappropriate content. And on the heels of that, Dr. Tedros himself responded to and tried to throw water on the parade that we had an effective treatment strategy. Anthony Fauci did the same. Around the world, you heard the same messaging, that we don't have a treatment for COVID and we may never. And they were desperate to shut it down because they needed the emergency use authorization, which you can't get if there's an effective treatment strategy. This is the evidence is there. People can go to budesonideworks.com and they can click on the links on the videos on the science studies, and they'll see that this is the story, probably the biggest kept secret, because it was an active agenda to suppress the truth and cause people to fall in line, roll up their sleeves, and be a part of the biggest human experiment in the history of the world. And
they lied and we died.
Yes, they lied. Many people died. Millions died. And the fact is 90% of the people would have never even gone to an urgent care center or an ER, much less be put in the hospital, if they would have been treated early with something that was already out. The news was already out there on the internet. There were many doctors speaking about it. And now, Bill, it's added to the national strategy for treating COVID by India a year ago. It's added to the national strategy to treat COVID in Australia, the 840-page document on how they're, as a nation, treating COVID and dealing with COVID. Number one is budesonide. But nobody's hearing that in the United States. Actually, when you want to hear about news in the United States, you really got to go to other countries, to the UK and other news outlets to hear it.
Well, sadly, our health community is captured. When I say our health community, I'm talking about, pharmaceuticals, the NIH, the CDC appear to be captured. And again, it's the old saying, follow the money. Look who got wealthy during this period of time.
Right.
And they seem to benefit greatly. I mean, it's just one of those suspicious kind of things. I'm just asking the question. I'm not indicting anybody, but I think that, there are many questions to be asked. There's, I believe investigations. I mean, if YouTube was serious, then it's one thing to say, okay, we want to declare this as misinformation. All right. Well, how about fulfilling the responsibility and checking it out for yourself, not letting just somebody with either no medical experience whatsoever, but just somebody who has a finger on a bit of the pulse of the narrative, and they measure the credibility of information based on their understanding, and I would say neophyte understanding of medicine, of the totality of the truth here. Now, these other countries, they're not beholden to big pharma. They can be smart and say, okay, wow, we're going to learn what these knuckleheads in the United States did. And we're going to take this information and we're going to use it to save our people and be all the smarter. I mean, for all that we went through, Richard, you would think that with experience defining preference, that we would have learned so much that any future pandemic, we would say, okay, we know what to do. We know how to batten down the hatches. We know how to come together. We know how to exercise good hygiene, all these other practical things that need to be implemented to protect ourselves, protect our families, and to make responsible decisions when it comes to our health, instead of listening to these people that promoted death instead of promoting life, and how they were able to get away with this. See, there's no consequence to them. Dr. Fauci's not going to pay a price. He just got a lot of money. All the rest of these, the CDC, those affiliated, and even these, as you mentioned, these celebrities that were paid, for all these endorsements. This is why they went so sideways when Aaron Rodgers wouldn't participate and go lockstep with them, right?
So, Bill, there's a few things I'm going to throw out there real quick for people to check on their own. The largest criminal fine in the history of the United States, when you think of Al Capone, the mafia, the current mob, you think of the drug cartel, the largest criminal fine in the history of the United States was against Pfizer. Wow. $2.3 billion that they were 2.3 B with $1 billion. The Department of Justice said that they purposely were misleading the public about their products. Check it out. And the second thing,
excuse me, just 1 second, real quick. So they pay a fine of $3.2 billion, right? You said
$2.3 billion.
$2.3 billion. What was the top line? How much money did they make, from this lie?
Right.
And the product?
You're right. It turns into that's just the cost of doing business for them, because because in 2022, Pfizer collected $38 billion just from the COVID shot in 2022 alone. And so they didn't just do the shot in 2022, and Moderna collected $18.4 billion in 2022 alone with the COVID shot. So you're right. That $2.3 billion is just the cost of doing business. Let me give another.
Yeah, hang on. Another thing too, just sidebar, only because you brought it up here, and follow the money. I wonder how much of that money was converted. I'm talking about the windfall profit, whether it's Moderna or, Pfizer. How much money went to political interest, and specifically, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party?
So, Bill, I am I'm with a group of doctors that said, hey, we need to form a nonprofit and ask the FDA for the Pfizer safety data on their Pfizer shot, COVID shot that they were pushing. Because we don't have the information. We got to give informed consent to patients if we're going to give a surgery, a medicine, a new experimental shot. We need to know the risk and the benefits, and they haven't told us anything. They did not tell patients, and they did not tell doctors in the United States.
So who's liable? So you're a doctor, and now your insurance is going to be increased because of some violation of something you didn't know about that they withheld?
Independent of that, I have a moral and ethical responsibility to tell patients the risk and the benefits. And we didn't have that. We didn't have that information. So we sued the FDA. We sued the FDA for the Pfizer shot data because Pfizer had given it to the FDA. The FDA came back and said, well, we legally are supposed to give you this information. We have it in the computer. Pfizer gave it to us, but we don't want the American people to see this information for 55 years.
Wow.
And then 2 weeks later, they changed their mind. They said, we changed our mind. We don't want the American people to see this information for 75 years. This is the FDA that's supposed to be protecting Americans from dangerous medicines and pharmaceutical companies going sideways.
This reeks like we're going to hold back the files of an assassination of a president. We're just going to arbitrarily do this. But this is the power of government agencies. And
Bill, I've got to tell the rest of the story.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
And so that wasn't enough. We met them, and we met the FDA in federal court in Fort Worth. The federal judge, Mark Pittman, told them, this is crazy. You got to tell the American people and the doctors the risk and the benefits that you have in your computer. And the FDA came back with, Judge, we don't have enough staff at the FDA to release this information to the American people for 75 years. And here's my paraphrase. The judge said, BS, you're going to release that information. And so in the first month, they gave 1/40th of the information every month. They drug it out. But the first drop of data showed a list of 1,200 diagnoses that'll either kill you immediately or can permanently disable you. A list that Pfizer made associated with their shot. And you know why you don't hear about that? Because in 1986, Congress passed a law that vaccine manufacturers, that industry alone, will never be sued, cannot be sued. They have liability immunity. Even if it's proven it killed your 5-year-old, you took your kid to the pediatrician and the pediatrician says, we're not going to see your kid. We're going to fire you as a patient if you don't get a COVID shot. And then they get the shot and the kid dies and it's proven that it's from the shot. The judge and the jury say there's no doubt. You can't sue the vaccine manufacturer because of that law in 1986. Did you know that, Bill?
No, I was very much aware of that. And I'm saying, okay, that's one thing. But in terms of, consent, advice and consent here, Richard, I need to know about that information. Okay, so I can't sue them, but for, going forward, why is that information kept from me so that I still, I just go blindly? I mean, this is what should be such an outrage of the majority of Americans. Because what we're talking about, again, we're talking 10, 15% of the ruling class that's pulling the levers here. And the rest of us, they're turning into lab rats. And, a death, your dad dying or mother dying or grandfather or, some family member dying, that's just it. That's risk reward. Sorry. It just it just comes with doing business when you're talking about pharmaceuticals, because, we have to have, we got to be able to do all this research and we got to be able to do all this good. But yet, look I'm for doing the research, but at the end of the day, what happened to the Hippocratic Oath that I think has got to be associated with even big pharma to say that you do no harm, right?
So we learned a lot from this COVID experience, and we don't want to forget the lessons learned. Number one, the FDA does not want you to know what they know. Number one, they're willing to hold the information that they have in the computer for 75 years from you.
Even still.
And so number two, that there might be things that are worth hiding. We know what they were trying to hide. Number three, you still don't hear this in the mainstream media. If there's a TV commercial for a drug, you're going to see at the end of it talking real fast, machine gun. They're going to say can cause headache, fever, diarrhea, death, etc.
Right.
And they do that because they could get sued. You're not hearing anything about the vaccines, even though we got this list of 1,200 diseases that will kill you immediately or could permanently disable you later, including dozens of autoimmune disorders. You're not going to hear about that still because of that law in 1986 giving vaccine manufacturers immunity. They're about to have another pandemic, Bill. And that's why I'm talking right now with you, is because we see the handwriting on the wall that they have pandemics in the can, and they have already made modified RNA vaccines for them. As a matter of fact, the USDA, our own USDA, gave over $1 million to China recently so that Chinese scientists can make a vaccine for you and your family. Do you think that's a good idea when we're talking about potential war with China in the Taiwan Straits and the sea outside of Taiwan, when we're talking about trade wars with China, when all the things the tension that we have in the world right now? Is it a good idea to conspire to have them make a vaccine for you and me?
Yeah, especially when China was not very cooperative when we were looking at COVID to begin with. Clearly, they withheld information. That I believe is accepted fact. Polling numbers, demonstrate that a majority of Americans believe that COVID came out of this lab in Wuhan. And, so the general consensus is that we cannot trust China, but yet our own government continues to partner with them, and it's just, we can't do this. And we have government agencies, like you said, you mentioned earlier, the FDA right now, they're dealing with the Supreme Court case, and this is regarding the abortion pill, right? And the way some of these justices look at the FDA as if they're gods. They're self-appointed gods, and there's no argument with them. And it's like, wait a minute, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, what happened to common sense?
So if someone's going to quote the FDA to you, that's the same FDA that wants to keep the information that they have in the computer from you for 75 years about the risk and the benefits of an experimental medicine that's now actually FDA approved, and they still are not releasing they had to be brought to federal court for that information to come out of the FDA. You had to drag it out of them legally in a federal court case. Now, that's the FDA. So should we trust the FDA right now? The second thing is the CDC. The CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, said, if you get the COVID shot, you won't get COVID. Was that true, Bill?
No, absolutely not.
Later, when that was proven to be a lie, because if it's not true, it's a lie. Later, when it was proven that she lied about that, then she said the next lie, that if you get the shot, you won't spread COVID. When that was proven to be wrong, then she said the next lie, that if you get the shot, then you won't get serious disease and death. Well, when that was proven wrong, which it was, then you don't hear, how many times are you going to listen to the same source that has lied to you over and over and over?
Exactly.
And so can we just trust a blind blanket statement, a vague statement from the CDC or FDA? Do we give blind trust to the FDA or CDC? No, we should not.
Well, you see, and what it does, it implicates the totality of our government. Because if you have agencies like this that you cannot trust, that are lying to you, this is why we've been saying repeatedly on our show over the years, Richard, based on their activity and their actions, is that the 3-letter agencies of our government are all suspect and they lack credibility. So whether it's the FDA, whether, it's any other, FBI, you don't know what to believe. Probably your normal reaction is to be suspicious. And I say, well, that's probably, that's probably a better idea right now.
I think it's healthy to take the information and then weigh it yourself and verify it. And so there are many people who did do that during COVID, but there are others who just repeated talking points. Exactly. They just repeated the same propaganda. And, I want to remind everyone that after World War II, they had the Nuremberg trials. After the Nuremberg trials, doctors were hung for doing human experimentation without getting informed consent, against people's consent, and without getting consent. And then they hung the media. Did you know that? They hung the press for propaganda. And so then they came up with the Nuremberg Code, 10 common sense things that are international law, that if you're going to do a human experiment, which emergency use authorization means human experimentation. If you're going to do a human experiment, you have to get informed consent. You have to give, you got to give the risk and benefits. That's part of the international law, Nuremberg Code. And secondly, you got to show that you did animal experiments and it was a good idea to do it on humans after it was successful in animals. They skipped all that. Yeah. And let me tell you, when we did this Operation Warp Speed, you got a warped product. Yes. And you got something, they skipped the 7 years to 10 years it takes for long-term safety data. That was unethical, immoral, and it should have been, and is illegal on certain counts before they changed the laws. You could not get anything through without long-term safety data. And we had thalidomide babies born because of a birth control pill that was FDA approved and later was causing babies to be born without arms and legs. Thalidomide babies. Do the research. And so there's no excuse for skipping long-term safety data. Yet you're about to see it happen again and again with pandemic after pandemic that they got in the can, and vaccines. So in 1975, they passed a bioweapon treaty in Congress that said you can't make bioweapons unless you make a small batch at the same time you're making a vaccine. And that explains everything. Yeah. They are making vaccines in real time as they're making a bioweapon in batches in biolabs around the world. And so I'll give you some information people can verify in mainstream media. Boston University bragged after 2 years of COVID that they had made a COVID strain in their lab in Boston University that has an 80% kill rate. Oof. What the heck are you doing? Exactly. Then you got the CDC in South Korea that brags that they made a COVID strain independent of that with gain of function research that has an 80% kill rate. Why? And then you got China about 4 months ago bragging that they made a COVID strain that has a 100% kill rate. Should this continue? No. There is a lab leak theory that actually the FDA says is valid. I mean, the FBI says is valid. Yeah. And the Department of Energy has intelligence agents, which would be another term for spies. And they have concluded that there's a lab leak that happened with COVID. It came from a lab. It's a bioweapon. It was genetically engineered. It's not a normal cold virus, coronavirus. This was a killer. It was designed to kill. It's gotten weaker and weaker lately, but these are things in the mainstream media, clues that they're still making bioweapons.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Bartlett, we've said this a couple of times, and previously when you and I had talked about the pandemics that were in the queue, I think there was a number delineated, something like 9 potential pandemics ready to be set on stage. The last time you and I talked, you said clearly, based on the information that you were getting and what we've been told by other scientists and those that are dealing with this, saying that the next pandemic is just around the corner, and why not? I mean, hey, look at we're going into an election year. The pandemic worked very effectively in the realm of politics for 2020. Why not bring it back?
It makes a lot of money, Bill. Every time
Yeah.
it's a moneymaker. It's a cash boom. And so, listen, there's a lot of reasons why this happens, but follow the money is absolutely a part of the equation when you're trying to find an explanation. Before this show is over, we have to end on a note of hope, because there are effective treatment strategies, Bill. And I want to tell people how to prepare for their families and their friends, and so that the plague might pass their house and not bother them. There are some common sense things that they can do. But yes, we learned a lot of things from COVID. We learned that the FDA is not transparent. When you want to hold the information from the American people for 75 years, that's not transparency. We learned that the CDC doesn't always get it right. They said, get the shot. They didn't offer any science and evidence. They just said, get it because we say so. And and they made promise after promise that was lie after lie. And so we learned that from COVID. We learned that there was literally a lab leak. We learned that there's a gain of function research happening. The masses did not know about gain of function research and bioweapon creation that's happening actively, aggressively with the U.S. taxpayer dollars right now. We learned that the media is captured, that you cannot hear the truth. When you watch the news, you're getting propaganda for the most part.
Well, the media is controlled, Richard. I mean, look at, this. Hopefully this is allowed to go out, because it goes out on YouTube. YouTube previously, whenever we've talked about COVID, they've gotten nervous, and
they should be nervous. They're lying and they're getting caught over and over. They should be real nervous, because there might be a day of reckoning where justice really happens, where the government actually holds them accountable. That might happen.
Well,
but
the government is we the people. You see, there's more of us than them. And we, the people, need to come together and understand that this is a war on humanity that's being engaged.
YouTube is responsible for many deaths by withdrawing life-saving information about an inexpensive, readily available, generic, safe medicine that's been out for 30 years at the beginning of COVID. They could have saved countless lives. It was later validated by Oxford University, the oldest university in the English-speaking world since 1096. With 72 Nobel Prizes. That's a very valid source of information. Exactly. The science was done. It was science. The science was settled. It was the Stoic trial, the Principle trial, the Together trial. So so YouTube absolutely is complicit. They're guilty, and they should be nervous, because what I just said about budesonide for COVID has been proven right, and they withheld a viral video that had 5.5 million views in 10 days because it was, quote, inappropriate content. Inappropriate to give life-saving information to the masses when we're in a worldwide pandemic? How is that inappropriate? They never did answer that. And so maybe if they're watching Bill Martinez today, maybe they'll give us a response on why they did that inappropriate thing.
Exactly. Well, let's continue on with this theme of hope, Dr. Bartlett, because what you have to share with our audience is hope, and also things that they need to be prepared, because undoubtedly the next pandemic is imminent.
It is imminent, because just on a Saturday, the President Biden just signed into law a spending bill that has $1 billion earmarked for a pandemic. $315 million of it is specifically for an influenza pandemic. $700 million of it is for a zoonotic infection. You put those together, that bird flu coming from birds to penguins to seals to a western Minnesota goat to humans would fit that narrative.
Exactly.
And so it's been funded now. We just funded the next pandemic. So when you have money that's readily available now, you can almost hear the scurrying in Washington, D.C. to try to get their piece of the pie.
Oh, without a doubt. Yes.
And so this is we're imminent. So I want to tell you, there are things you can do to decrease your chance of getting sick or spreading a bioweapon if it happens, if there's a pandemic that's a respiratory virus. Bird flu would be a respiratory virus.
Yes.
COVID was a respiratory virus. We were told by CDC Director Redfield, when the bird flu pandemic comes, he said that will be the great pandemic. COVID was just a wake-up call. That's what he said. He said it will kill 10 to 15% of Americans that get it. 10 to 15% of the people that get the disease will die. We only had less than 2% of the people get the COVID die. And so you're going from less than 2%, like 1.5% dying from COVID, to 15% with the bird flu pandemic, according to Dr. Redfield, the CDC director. Does the CDC director get some information that you and I don't get in secret meetings? Absolutely. And so he knows what's coming. He knows what's coming. He told the secret for a moment there, in a moment of weakness. He told the truth. And so I'm going to tell you, for a respiratory virus, these are the things I'm doing for my family. Okay. I bought Immune Mist. It's a nose spray and mouth spray that has betadine, iodine in it, and that kills viruses on contact. It's safe to do daily. I bought that for my family on the internet. Immune Mist.
Okay.
You can use that if there's an outbreak. Second thing that I bought for my family is Xlear, Xlear, another nose spray that also will work because it's a sugar alcohol that interferes with the virus or bacteria sticking to your respiratory lining. It's been proven to be effective. I bought that for my family. I'm just telling you what I did for my family. I think it's a good idea, and people need to know about these tools. Exactly. Another tool that helped during COVID that I learned about was HydroShot. It's from H2Bev.com. HydroShot is something that we have for our family because it helps make nitric oxide for 10 hours. And it also has hydrogen infused water. It has several things that are very valuable. Then there's another product that they have called Silver Bullet that has EGCGs of green tea. When I talked to Dr. Zelenko before he died, he was the guy who came up with hydroxychloroquine as an ionophore to zinc into cells to interfere with virus multiplication. He told me in a Zoom meeting when we first met, there's another thing that will help get the zinc into cells called EGCG, so a chemical that's natural in green tea. The Silver Bullet product of H2Bev.com has EGCGs and zinc in it. So you don't have to take extra supplemental zinc. What I have for my family is Silver Bullet drinks. So if there's an outbreak, then that's what we have on hand. We don't drink that every day, but we have it on hand so that when there's a crisis, we're not waiting for 3 months for something to be shipped to us.
Exactly. Richard, you said the website again for is it H2Bev?
Yeah, it's like hydrogen beverage. It's H2Bev.com.
Okay. All right.
And so that's where you get HydroShot, and that's where you get Silver Bullet. That's where I got it for my family, and we have a lot of it on hand, and we're prepared. Another tool that we're using, if it's a bird flu, budesonide nebulizer treatments will shut down the cytokine storm, which is a common pathway with COVID and will be with a bird flu pandemic. And if it's a bird flu that kills 15% instead of 1.5% of COVID, you better believe there's going to be a shortage again. There was rolling shortages of budesonide during COVID. And so you need to be proactive. It's a medicine that's so safe, it's been used on 2-pound premature babies in the NICU for 30 years without batting an eye. There's no more delicate human on the planet than a 2-pound preemie in the ICU. And so it's safe, it's inexpensive, it's readily available right now. So you better be prepared. I'm also over the counter. You can get budesonide nose spray, and we have that for our family as well. That's over the counter. It's so safe. It's over the counter. Doesn't require a prescription, and it downregulates ACE receptors, which was the doorway for COVID to get into your body was ACE receptors. Bill, listen to this fact. In 2020, when we were at the brunt of COVID, More children died from school bus related accidents than COVID. Less than 400 kids died from COVID in the United States of 330 million people. Did you ever hear that fact in the mainstream media? No,
Never. This is the first time. Yes,
exactly. They closed the schools. Dr. Birx was the architect of this crap, where she said close the schools. And you know what? They had to downgrade speech milestones. The national speech milestones for kids' development was downgraded permanently because of what they did with COVID, with the masks and closing the schools. Exactly. And so they caused great harm that can be measured on many levels. But the fact is, children were less at risk for COVID because they have less ACE receptors. And so if you use, and every year you have more and more ACE receptors in your respiratory lining, in your nasal passages, your throat, your lungs. And so if you use budesonide daily, you downregulate the ACE receptors, you become more protected like children. That's a good idea.
Exactly.
And so there's lots of things that can be done preventively. These are some that are practical, because a respiratory virus comes in through your nose and mouth and multiplies in your nose and mouth and throat for 3 to 5 days. That's called a prodrome period. And it's multiplying exponentially until it gets to a critical mass. And then it causes disease. But if you keep killing the virus down with these tools that we talked about, you will be many times not even know you were infected, because you'll never have a disease manifestation. You certainly won't be contagious.
Exactly.
Also, mouthwash, simple mouthwash like Listerine, or a generic brand that says it kills 99.9% of germs, doing that daily. And if there's a pandemic, do it more often. If you start to get sick, do all of these tools more frequently, but at least once a day if there's a pandemic, because mouthwash was proven in the University of Carlisle in the UK in about July 2020 that it kills COVID and other viruses in 30 seconds on contact. What a great idea.
Exactly. Yeah, this is awesome. This is what you do for your family. We're talking with Dr. Richard Bartlett. He's the emergency room medical director. And the prescription, not a prescription, I mean, just in terms of what kind of advice and counsel that he's sharing with us is what he's used for his own family, because we need to be prepared. What about, I mentioned ivermectin. I want to revisit that for just a moment. Is there any validity on that?
Bill, there's a tremendous amount of buzz about ivermectin. Half the studies show that it worked against COVID. Half the studies showed it didn't work. There is another product that had on every study success against COVID. That was budesonide, nose spray, budesonide nebulizer treatments. And so I think ivermectin on some level is a distraction. And I'm saying that very loud and clear. And so I'm not stuttering when I say that. There was only one product that's been suppressed to the max, and that was something that could have saved lives. I actually did bring people off of the ventilator in the ICU, brought them home alive when ivermectin failed them, and they ended up in the hospital on the ventilator. So many people died with ivermectin, but there were many people that were in the hospital because they took ivermectin that actually lived when they were given budesonide. And so I've given the strategies that are solid. And so there's many other things. I'll tell you, I'm an ER doctor. People don't come to the emergency room and say, do you have any vitamins, herbs, spices, twigs that I can use? Because I got a deadly disease.
Right.
And no, they actually want real solid information. So I just gave you the solid information. And I'll tell you, Bill, there's a lot of buzz on, and things get distracted. There are things that are oversold. In my strong opinion, ivermectin has been a strong oversell. Yes. And it's not a be all end all. It's not an answer to all things. And so I'm saying that really clear. But we do have strategies that I've just mentioned that absolutely will make a plague pass your house. It's giving you all the tools so you can try to stay safe during a pandemic. And so I'm telling you what I'm doing for my family.
Well, this is great. Well, and again, we're so grateful to hear about budesonide, especially, and these other strategies that you've shared with us as well, Dr. Bartlett. Where else can they go for more information to be in touch with you?
You know, I collaborate a lot with John Fleetwood. So a lot of his articles are after we've talked over the phone and hashed things out and talked about the latest news, and we connect the dots that are not being talked about. Many people have not seen the things that we're talking about. You can go to johnfleetwood.com, JON Fleetwood.com. I want to mention, Bill, many people probably don't know, but it's worth knowing that I was an advisor to Governor Rick Perry for 7 years on the Health Disparities Task Force, giving him, the Lieutenant Governor and Speaker of the House, advice on how to make access to quality care available for all Texans, inner city, rural, urban, all ethnicities. And so we had great success. And after 7 years, I received the Meritorious Service Award from the Texas Health and Human Services. That was back when things were a little more honest in government.
Right.
And so it had more value. Yeah. But still, that's not a common award. And so when I say these things, you're hearing it from someone who was an advisor for the state of Texas for 7 years. You're hearing this from a doctor who's talking about how I'm taking care of my family with the coming pandemic. It's imminent.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Richard Bartlett, cannot thank you enough. Appreciate the time and the information that no doubt will save lives for this imminent pandemic that is on the horizon. Again, we thank you so much for being with us. Take care.
Thank you, Bill.
Dr. Richard Bartlett has been our guest. I want to thank you for sharing a part of your day. Hopefully this has been a benefit for you. That is our prayer, is that you would benefit greatly from this information. But as we say always, you need to own your own knowledge. Check it out for yourself, what Dr. Bartlett has shared with us. Some great information here that will save lives, no doubt, with this next pandemic. But it's up to us individually to activate our citizenship, our freedom, and our knowledge. As God said, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Well, you've got some knowledge. Now do something with it. Save yourselves and save your family. Again, thank you for being with us. God bless you. May God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Take care.